Welcome to the Ep134 podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. Molly Lacroix is my guest on this episode, and as a marriage and family therapist, she engages in the kind of art I find inspiring and incredibly rare, as well as really necessary. She takes what would otherwise be perhaps even frustratingly wildly difficult concepts, things out of the reach of the average person's daily knowledge, and then boils those down, communicates those in such a way that folks like me can get handles on those ideas, but does so in a way that doesn't, demean me, or just as importantly, doesn't do so in a way that diminishes the depth, richness, and complexity of the traditions and the systems she's referencing. Working at the intersection of spirituality and interpersonal relationship, as a family therapist, she's specifically trained in what is called internal family systems, which is a model of understanding human interaction and our engagement with the world and our relationships and the systems we function in. I just find deeply freeing and has been really helpful for my own practice and for the lives of a lot of people I care about. This was a fascinating and wonderful conversation. I think you'll benefit from it. Check it out. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks
Great.
for.
And I think if I'm getting this right, this is like maybe our third rescheduling because I kept.
I think it might be.
It's totally me.
But no, because I'm pretty sure the first time I was really sick.
Oh, that's right. It was totally your fault. Okay,
and
great.
Then,
fantastic.
Yeah, you can blame it all. No, that was, then there was a funeral that you had to attend.
Yeah, there was a thing. Yeah, that was true. So my excuse was better.
You had a good
as long as I come out feeling better.
That's right.
About the disconnect.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we may, by healthy relationship, we just mean like, I feel better about our disconnect. Right. I think that's good. Okay.
We're all set.
We're all set. Thanks for jumping on. I'm thrilled to talk to you about a little bit about your book and about your work. Thanks for doing it. In general, I've paid a little bit of attention to some of the stuff you've done in other podcasts, and some of the conversations you have. And the line, there's this line you actually use. It's kind of like it's, I don't want to call it like a hook line because that's like a marketing thing, but it really is this sort of prodding, I guess. You say, do you wonder why Christians talk so much about love, but then just don't do it well, or just don't do it at all? It's a heck of a critique to throw, and it's great. Mm-hmm. So let's start here. What does it mean to love someone? Like, I mean, I'm right on the edge of like launching into like an 80s rock ballad here, but like, what does it even mean? Like, what does it mean to love someone? And then in general, and then like, why is it particular to like Christians and to churches? Why is the critique that specific? So what does it mean to love someone? And then why is that an important question for Christians and for churches?
Yeah. Well, way to start in the shallow end, Justin.
Yeah, I don't do much in the shallow end. I either do dysfunctional relationship or we go all the way in. This is
all joking aside, I appreciate your question because it's so easy to throw things out and much harder to describe. Well, what do we mean by that?
Yep.
So when I think of love, I think of connection. Okay. I think of open-hearted ability to be with someone as they are in whatever, wherever they are, which is maybe they are suffering. And some of us can hang with that much more readily than others, but it's being present if we're across from someone who's in a state that isn't so easy for me to connect with. Whatever that state might be, whether that's anger or racism or pain or whatever. Yeah. Can I actually stay present with curiosity? Curiosity is it's a huge part of loving someone. Being curious about their story, about what shaped them, why they show up in the world in the way that they do. And so that's like I want to say the first step, only it's kind of not the first step because that's not often where we start when we're
it's not
with someone. And this dovetails a little bit into the challenges we run into in some faith communities because it's really human challenges that sometimes get exacerbated in some of our faith communities.
Yeah.
But the challenge of not sitting in judgment of that other person. Now, I challenge the Christian community because adherents who say I'm a Jesus follower or I identify as Christian, or, there are some common values that we promote.
Yeah.
And, judgment is something that Jesus says, don't look at the plank and, the speck in the other guy's eye, look at the plank in your own.
Right.
So we're warned about something like judgment, but it's a really natural impulse. And so I challenge the faith community because I'm saying, can we live out this radical love that if we say we're a Jesus follower, theoretically, we want to exhibit?
How have you seen that miss? And this is part of the I don't want to call it a mystery per se, but it's part of what's confounding, I think, for a lot of folks who are either like peripheral to or even outside the Christian community. Is like, your thing is really clear, guys. Like, here's your guy. Here's Jesus. This is what he's about. You're missing. Talk about the ways in which you see that missing, specifically in the Christian community, specifically from the standpoint of like institutional practice. How is this missing, and why is it so easy? Even easy is not the word. Why is it so perpetual? Why is it constant?
Yeah,
it's like it is a sweeping critique of evangelical mainline Christian culture right now. Is like, you don't look like the loving Jesus that we would expect if we were approaching you. So where do you see that missing, and why is this so pervasive?
Yeah. Well, I see it missing, especially when we are, as I indicated, sitting across from someone who's going through something that touches something in our own story. So let's say someone's struggling with an addiction of some kind. And of course, there's been a lot of judgment, a lot of shame, all these different responses to that in the church, or to a mental health issue. People being told that they're depressed because they don't pray enough, or they don't believe the right things, or, so we're sitting across from something we don't understand.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't really want to understand it. And all of that, all of those reactions to the other person's situation are rooted in fear. And so this is human stuff. This isn't just Christian stuff. It's just that the fear manifests in certain ways in our Christian communities. But one of the reasons a part of my book delves into this topic called interpersonal neurobiology, which has to do with human relationships and how we as humans come into this world with very immature brains. We are wired for survival. And so our systems really pick up on things that are a threat. And we hold those things very tightly. And we have these, what we call mental models in our brain that are shortcuts. We make meaning of a certain situation. And this is held implicitly. Like we don't even know we hold this stuff. And yet it shapes how we interact in the world. And a lot of it is rooted in a lot of what we hold has to do with situations that were threatening. And so when we're across from something that evokes fear in us, and it can do that for a variety of reasons, our responses tend to be out of that fear, not out of love. So
I love this.
And
that's because of the way the brain is wired.
That's right.
This isn't just like, this isn't like, hey, you grew up in a bad household and therefore you have these trauma triggers. The brain is wired in such a way that I naturally recognize threat and have responses to it because I want to survive. And that's just, so, which leads me to this question.
That's the normal human condition. Now, I want to quickly jump in there and say that if you also experienced a lot of childhood adversity, trauma, that's going to very much affect your brain
It
too.
exacerbates that. Yes.
But exactly. But yes, it is the kind of the bedrock human condition that we have these brains wired for survival, and
so
how that
you'll hear my bias and critique it as I ask the question. I'm not even going to try to hide it.
Okay.
Because that's not it's not fun to do. Is it possible to actually do the work of spiritually caring for people as a pastor, as a community leader, without understanding brain science? At this point in human history, is it possible and responsible to do the work of pastoring people without understanding, to some degree, brain science and chemistry, like human chemistry? Or is that just ridiculous? Isn't that part of the issue, is that pastors don't? Isn't that part of what's wrong?
It absolutely is. Ooh, we are kindred spirits, because what
Yeah.
I talk about, the phrase that I use is human functioning. So if you're trying to pastor humans and you don't understand human functioning, there's going to be a big disconnect.
Yes.
And we, we can't learn everything there is to know about human functioning in the Bible. It tells us a lot. We can learn a lot. But we now, especially in the last 20 years, and it's just an evolving, growing field, we know a lot more than we used to about how the brain is shaped in relationship. Most of us have heard about attachment styles, and
Yes.
all of the experiences we have shape our brains and then shape the way we interact with others and ourselves. And so, yes, if you want to minister to people, you probably ought to understand people. And
Yeah.
this is
At
now
the
available.
level of like brain science,
Yeah,
actual
because
connections,
that's
neurons, then whole nine.
exactly. And that, again, I made my effort in my book to give people a little bit of an introduction. And the reason it's so important is that we are really vulnerable creatures
Yes.
because of our very slow development brain wise.
Hmm.
And so that's a big part of understanding human functioning is
Say more about, we're vulnerable because of our slow development brainwaves. You're talking about how long it takes,
yeah,
I think,
how long it takes
to rewire. Like I have these fears, I have these reactions and responses. It takes a long time to undo that, or to rewire the brain. Is that part of what you're getting after?
That is part of it. That's true. What I was really referring to is how we come into this world with this very undeveloped brain.
Got it.
The human species is, so the brain is shaped in relationship. And so because of that, we are exquisitely vulnerable to the quality of those relationships.
Yeah.
And in the attachment world, people will talk about, well, you're securely attached or you're insecurely attached. And then there are the different kinds of insecure attachment. Frankly, my perspective is we all have a degree of insecure attachment. Nobody had perfect caregivers.
Yeah.
And so there's always, it's a continuum. And so some people have what we can objectively say, oh my gosh, you didn't have anything you deserved as a child. You didn't have the care and nurturing and attention and anything you needed. But even we probably both know people, maybe we both are people that had that so-called good enough experience. And yet we still hold wounds. We still have those experiences where we hold shame and we say, I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. And this is because of the nature of our brain, and how when these very formative years, from birth to now, it ranges through adolescence at least.
Yeah.
All of these experiences are happening at a time where we're not the people in power in our lives. We're dependent on a lot of other authority figures, and things don't always go well. And so we hold all that, and it shapes us.
In the same vein of conversation, one of the counters, or one of the sticking points has something to do with the practice of prayer. and the practice and effectiveness of prayer. So I've done 2 prayer books. I'm a fan of the practice. I'm also aware of, and increasingly I don't want to say suspicious of, but wary maybe of the limitations of the practice of prayer. I'd love for you to talk about the practice of, like, coming through the doorway of psychotherapeutics and of understanding brain science. Talk about the practice of prayer in human formation, and specifically in this light. And I'm sorry for the complexity of the question, but one of the places I see this division happening is when you say, when you talk about the slowness of the human mind to change. It is true through adolescence. In, let's say, that 17th year of life, when you recognize, like, oh, I've actually been, I think I was abused as a kid, or I've got this trauma. You can go to the Christian therapist who will tell you to read Matthew and pray it away. Like, and I both have had these conversations with folks. It's like, I'm not going to tell people not to pray, but let's be honest about what, like, the role of prayer here. That's like the darkest little corner of how this question goes. But talk about the actual role of prayer, or the role of prayer as you've seen it in health, and then maybe address that moment where someone's like, hey, like, you've got actual trauma, you're remembering an assault from being 3. Just pray about it.
Right.
Talk about both those things for a minute.
Okay. So the first piece, the general practice of prayer, for me, it's fundamentally about connection with God. It's conversation. And one of the complexities of my lens is there's brain science, and then there's also these different models of psychotherapy and how we understand human functioning. And the one that I used is called internal family systems.
Yes.
And it's a model that recognizes we are multiple, that when we turn our attention inside ourselves, we notice different parts of ourselves. We often speak like this without noticing it. We'll say, well, part of me wants to go to church. Yeah. Or part of me wants to pray, but this other part of me doesn't.
We're acknowledging difference within our own person.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this model, actually, we notice, like, we have persons within the person, and it's been very useful for people to understand themselves this way, and to recognize that, let's say an individual has a part of them that holds a great degree of anger because there is underlying pain from abuse. And it's very natural in our human system to feel angry in response to that, because it gives us energy to take action to right a wrong. There's nothing wrong with the anger, but if somebody is riddled with rage, it's very hard for them to function in life and in relationship. And they find this rage is taking over them. But when they come to understand, well, this is not all of who I am. This is a part of me that holds this for a very good reason, and actually is trying to help me, because this part of me thinks the only response to powerlessness is rage, because I can take over and have power. Yeah. So that's a snippet of understanding. So when it comes to prayer, one of the interesting things is who's praying. So if I go to, if my intention is to sit in the presence of God, however I'm conceptualizing that, well, maybe, there are parts of me that think prayer is all about words spoken to God. Yeah. Because maybe that's how I've been taught. And it's kind of an interesting exercise to notice, well, who's here today? And what parts of me have needs to express things or needs to be met. And kind of as we connect with different parts of ourselves, there's a softening and a spaciousness that happens inside, where there's more like a soul to God connection that can happen. And it's not that these parts of ourselves are bad. They're connecting with God is important for them too. Yeah. But I think we can get to more of a posture of receiving and listening when we allow these parts of us that might be full of words and busyness to have their needs met.
Yes.
So it's sort of a general
I love that. That's great.
model. So then the question you asked about someone who recognizes I suffered trauma.
Yeah.
And they go to some kind of faith community and they're told, pray about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that prayer won't be helpful to that person. If they can be in a space where they can feel God's presence, that can be profound. In feeling the loving presence of a God who is all about our healing. It can really instill hope for the healing journey when they have those experiences. But unfortunately, if it's said as a spiritual bypass, and it's said out of someone's fear of, I don't know what to do with this person who had trauma. Oh my gosh, I know I feel completely ill-equipped. And so, well, the only thing I know to do is to tell them to pray.
Yes.
So that's the difference, is not recognizing that there is trauma always requires a robust, multifaceted approach to treatment. And one of those is spiritual practices, such as prayer. But that's not all that's necessary. And so
this is what that you do with your work that I was hoping to get to, is like there is a I guess like a sliver or kind of like a thread in what some are calling the deconstruction culture. That's overused term, the whole nine, but in which, like, because this doesn't do everything, it doesn't have a place at all. So, and that's happening. I hear this in a lot of conversations about, specifically about trauma, and people's relationship with a local church or with religious leadership, because religious leadership doesn't provide everything. It doesn't have a place at all. Now, that's obviously, that tension's exacerbated by like some of the hubris with which religious leaders have gone about approaching mental health. That's a conversation.
Or anything else.
might have missed the mark and earned some of those earned some of those Fs. But like, you used the word robust there. It goes back to therapy, spiritual direction, spiritual practices, exercise. You're talking about the wholeness as a
That's
person. So in the same way that I'm, there's a family system. What's the phrase again? It's family systems.
Internal family systems.
Internal family systems.
IFS. Yeah.
Yeah. Insofar as that's true of me internally, it's also true of us culturally, and we have various parts and roles to play. Can you describe what? And this is like 40,000 feet, and so feel free to dodge as much as you want here. But like, what does a healthy life look like then? So if I lean this way, I'm exercising, I'm outside all the time, and people who say like, jogging is my religion, and lifting weights is my therapy, and I go to the gym, like that sort of thing. And the other folks are like, I pray, I get silent, I go to Wednesday night Bible study, I have a Thursday night thing, I'm in the Word every day, that's my everything. And then you got folks who are like, that's all trash, it's just happening in the level of the brain. Yeah. What does a healthy life look like in practice? Do I need a therapist, a spiritual director, or pastor? Like, what does that look like? What's a healthy life?
Full menu. Well, and of course, and I mean, to state the obvious, it is going to be different for different people, because we aren't all the same, and we're going to resonate with different practices and different healing modalities. But I think at the core of health for humans is connection. And there's good research to back that up. That one of the greatest threats to our well-being, physically and mentally, is being alone. And I'm not talking I mean, feeling lonely, which we can feel no matter where we are. There's a great book by John Cacioppo called Loneliness that is full of the research if you're interested in digging in. But it is a threat to our survival. So this goes back to the fact that we are connected, evolutionarily, to say other mammals.
Yeah.
And the animal in the herd that's at the edge is at risk.
Yeah.
And as humans, we still carry that legacy of fear of being an outsider, which is, you look at the culturally what's going on right now, and this, people as humans, they want to be in a tribe. And that's a whole different conversation we could have. But
Sure.
But so we do need connection, and that
Yeah.
can take different forms for different people. And that gets to our different personality types.
Yeah.
But connection is vital. And those activities that we're doing for the health of our body, for instance, I'm a big fan, and I know it's overused, but it's still important, which is balance. Because as we look at where am I investing my time and energy, if I am spending an extraordinary amount of time in the gym, let's just pick on, exerciseaholics.
Sure.
That might be something I'm using to bypass something that I need to go inside myself and process.
Yeah.
So assessing ourselves is vital to our health. So what is the quality of the connections? Different people need different numbers of connections, but what is the quality of those connections? Do I have people in my life I can be authentic and open with, that I can be vulnerable with?
Yeah.
Am I taking reasonable care of my body? Am I doing anything to excess that's harming my body? Well, that's not something I should judge, that I should feel shame about. That's something I should get curious about.
Yeah.
Oh, how is this helping me? How is it helping me to exercise to the point where I'm hurting my body? Maybe I should think about that.
Yeah.
So I think those being curious, definitely focusing on connection. And of course, I believe that connection with God is one of those.
Yes.
We look at the great commandment, and it kind of gives us the vision: connect with God, connect with others, and the often forgotten part of connecting with ourselves.
Yeah.
Because that's super important too.
That's really good. I was in a conversation with someone recently who said that they had plans with a group of people, and everyone had arrived with this last person, and the last person texted the group and said, I'm not going to make it. I left the house and had an anxiety attack, and so I'm going home. And as this person was telling the story, I could hear in their voice a kind of a bit of an eye roll of like, and they were questioning, I don't want to say rightly or wrongly, like whether or not this person actually had an anxiety attack. And as we talked about it, I said, you don't seem to believed him. And he was like, well, he goes, I don't know, like whether it was or wasn't. He said, what I know is like, the people around me use these terms all the time. And I think they might be he didn't say this exactly. He was more cross about it. Like they might be just misidentifying other things. Like maybe you got in the car and you just like felt like nervous, and then you call it an anxiety attack. That I don't know that happens all the time. One of the pitfalls to the familiarity with which we're coming to mental health conversations is the misuse of words, and it's a natural part of the process.
Yeah.
We're going to be here for a minute. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to put some words on the table and just have you, I'm going to say like, what is, like, well, we'll begin with depression. Like what is it, what is depression? What does it mean to be depressed? And we'll just go through a short list. So let's start with depression. What does it mean actually? What is depression? What does it actually mean to be depressed?
Yeah. Well, it's complex, because as with most of these issues, it is a continuum. So depression and grief overlap quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I might be grieving a loss, which can be myriad losses. We've all experienced some loss during the pandemic, so we can relate to that. So, and I can feel that depressed mood, sorry, air quotes here, of a lack of energy, a lack of motivation. I kind of want to curl up on the couch and watch Netflix all day. I don't really want to take care of myself. I mean, those are standard indicators of a depressed mood. That can be, again, related to grief or something else, often is connected to a loss.
Yeah.
But it passes. And it's not pervasive, and it's not recurrent. on the farther end of this continuum, is the very complex, disorder that involves repeated profound episodes of depression. Often there is what we call an endogenous component, which means there's some brain chemistry involved. And so again, it's a complex phenomenon. So there's complex treatment, often both medication and therapy and other activities. And that has to be done. You can't just say, oh, well, you need to exercise more because exercise is shown to help depression. Well, someone who is in a depressive episode has no motivation to move their body.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's a variety of help needed.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
So we do want to be careful about throwing around these terms casually.
Yes.
All of us as humans will have days where we feel depressed.
And all the more reason
that doesn't mean
pay attention to folks who've done the work and use the terms because there's 7 years of schooling behind it. And not just schooling, but the practice of helping other people who are living in that posture. Right. It's maybe not the best education in mental health to just follow a ton of Instagram accounts.
Right.
Might not be the best education. Talk about anxiety in that same context. What is it? There's nervousness and anxiousness.
Yeah.
And then there's anxiety. What is anxiety? What does it look like for someone to suffer with anxiety?
Yeah. If somebody meets the criteria for an anxiety disorder, and there are several of them, there is a really pervasive experience of anxiety, maybe more days than not. And often there's an inability to connect that experience of anxiety with an event, with some obvious trigger.
A general sense, everything is on fire.
And that can be part of what's very distressing for the individual, because there's a desire, a part of us usually wants to figure out, well, why is this happening to me? Because we think, well, if I can figure it out, I can fix it. So it makes sense that we want to figure it out. Yep. But so again, this goes to how complex these things are, because this can be the legacy of very early experiences of a misattunement with our caregivers. And when there's a misattunement with caregivers, and this is, again, before we have narrative recall of the events of our life, so certainly before the age of 3, maybe even before the age of 5, those numbers change all the time. If there's a consistent misattunement with our caregivers, then that's a big threat to the organism. And misattunement can be over-involvement and under-involvement. Interestingly. And that can create a profound anxiety in the organism. And here they are, fast forward to their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I've had people as old as and an older gentleman, he must have been in his late 60s, and had his first onset of profound anxiety. And it went all the way back to early childhood, but he had coped with a very demanding career. And that's what we do as humans. We adapt to our circumstances.
Yes.
And so when that ended and he retired, whoosh, up comes all this anxiety that his system had been stuffing. So that's a bit of a tangent.
Because he didn't have a place to put it.
That's right, because his primary coping mechanism was off the table. Yeah. And now his system, was manifesting all this anxiety. And so anxiety, again, it can be about those early attachment experiences. It can be about other kinds of traumatic events. All of these things. The interesting thing is that we hold a genetic legacy of our ancestors. There's this field called epigenetics that shows, there's been a woman named Rachel Yehuda did research on the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And you could see a change at the genetic level as a result of the trauma of their ancestors. So sometimes people come into this world with a genetic legacy that can make them vulnerable, to being a more anxious person than another person. So often the roots of it are mysterious, but there are a lot of things we can do about it. That's the good news.
The other phrase I want to get into, the thing I want to ask you to talk to, is one of the things you've written about. It's in the book, and you've blogged about feelings of being overwhelmed and decision making. And it's
Mm.
one of the most pervasive experiences I find among my directees as a spiritual director,
Mm-hmm.
or my clients as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, talking to artists, talking to pastors, talking to
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs, just the average everyday human. It is a talking about pervasive expression
Mm-hmm.
of busyness, of overwhelm, the inability to make a
Mm-hmm.
decision.
Mm-hmm.
You address this somewhat regularly. Talk a little bit about like what's going on
Mm-hmm.
culturally, interpersonally. Why are we feeling so overwhelmed so often? And what are we supposed to do about that?
Mm. Yeah. Well, overwhelm is one whole topic and decision making is another. And yes, they dovetail. So maybe we'll start with overwhelm. There's there as a we want to fit in. I think a lot of this goes back to the that very instinctive desire to be part of the group. And if the culture is saying to be part of this group, you have to be doing all of these things,
Hmm.
then if we aren't extremely thoughtful about that and we take a
Yeah.
big step back and assess, wait a minute, what is it, what's mine to be doing
Yeah.
and what's not, which is where the decision making comes in.
Yeah.
We can reflexively just start doing things and get
Yeah.
into overwhelm. And so reflection is so important. And of course, the lens that I use for that is to identify these different parts of our internal family, if you will,
Yeah.
as the metaphor that we use. And so if we're making decisions about even all the things I've got on my plate that are leading me to this place of overwhelm, then we can get curious about, why am I doing this thing? What
Hmm.
is the importance of that to me?
Yeah.
Um, and do this like series of meetings with these parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
I write about this leader of the internal family
Hmm.
that we have found. So in this is a secular model of psychotherapy, as all of
Yeah.
them are. The other thing you referred to earlier of someone going in and being told to pray more by a so-called Christian counselor, that would be somebody who does biblical counseling. That is not something that someone trained in psychotherapy is going to recommend, because it's not based on a research-based model of psychotherapy. So
Right.
bit of a tangent, but so this particular model of psychotherapy that identified not only that there are parts of ourselves, but there's this essence within us that Christians
Hmm.
might call a soul.
Yeah.
In the model, they just call it self, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
And it turns out that we have these resources that we possess,
Hmm.
no matter what's happened to us in life. So resources like clarity and curiosity
Hmm.
and compassion. And that's the leader of the internal family. And when we consider those of us who believe we were created in God's image, it would make sense
Yep.
that we have these God-given resources. And we can bring those to bear in establishing relationships with these different members of our internal family. And that can help us get to a point where we can step back as the leader and have broad perspective and make decisions about what is mine to do, what isn't.
I like that.
What is my priority, what isn't. What am I doing because somebody else thinks I should be, and I actually shouldn't be,
Yeah. I really liked, I mean, even just by nature, the title of the book, you're talking restoring relationship, transforming fear into love through connection. And you've done in this interview, you do your work, you continue to over and over come back to emphasize connection. It's the model you're working with. And I just feel like that's such a vital reorientation to I don't want to call it the conversation, but to like thoughts about, practices about, or like self-reflection on being healthy mentally, emotionally, otherwise. That the the cultural mechanical push to, it's not even individualism, it's isolation, is monstrous. Johann Hari's book Lost Connections,
Yeah, it's excellent.
it's
Yes.
fantastic. I've been throwing
Yes.
this at people like regular. I'm like, it's one of the best books I've
Please
ever
read
read.
this book.
Please read this book.
And
And it has a lot of,
speaking of anxiety and depression,
yes,
it's a new lens on
and
it. Yeah.
he does through different doorways what you've done with this book, and they're both such great reads for this reason. Is one, um, uh, the necessary critique, like this is not just a matter of there's something wrong with you, because it's so easy, especially paying attention to the way mental health is addressed, joked about, talked about, or even like when we attempt to solve it, when we do this publicly now, it's so hyper individualized that it is isolating. There's something. I have OCD. I live with ADHD. I'm an Enneagram 4. Everything is very like it can, and so I have to figure out how to get my crap wired. It's so hyper individualized, and both you and he make this brilliant readjustment that, like, listen, you can do all the work you want to internally, but this is much bigger than you. Like health, your whole health is actually broader and bigger than you. The part of that he gets to that you address as well, and I'd love for you to speak to this, is some of the systems we place ourselves in. They're not for us. Like in other words, is that they were designed for us. They're designed for us, but they're not there for your health. They don't want you to be healthy. And so you can do all the work you want to internally, but if you continue to place yourself in these environments, you're not going to beat Google. You don't have you're not going to beat Google. You're not going to combat the people who design these things and their intentions. You're not going to outsmart this clan of people. You have to reorient your situation as well. So you can practice, you can do your practices, get exercise, go see a therapist, work out your prayer life. And if you don't remove yourself or readjust your positioning in some of these environments, you're still screwed.
Yeah.
Talk about the environmental aspect of like, particularly in this moment, like what we're up against, because it's not just an internal battle. This is deeply cultural.
Yeah. It's so helpful to understand systems. And I'm really thankful that as I came into the mental health field, I chose my particular slice of the pie. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we are trained in systemic theories of human functioning. And so family systems is a big part of that, understanding how we're shaped by our family of origin. But it goes, so this, as I've said, the model I use goes inside to look at this internal family. And guess what? There are dynamics inside, such as we experience outside. But then we go to the next layer of connection to our extended family. Then we go to the next layer to maybe our ethnic group and our culture, there's so many systems in which we're embedded. One of them that we're embedded. There's this system of social media or media in general, and the kinds of influences that system has on us. And some of them we're aware of, and then sometimes we're not so aware. We're exposing ourselves to this. Someone can do all the quote right things to take care of themselves, and then pick up their phone and scroll and start feeling depressed.
It takes
and
moments.
Start spiral. Absolutely. It takes about 1 or 2 posts, and you're spiraling into feeling less than, not good enough. And the more we have actual life experiences that seeded those distorted beliefs, the more vulnerable we are to that. So our experience does influence our vulnerability to that. But again, my thing is, if you're human, you've suffered adversity. And so we are all vulnerable to an extent. And we have to do this self-assessment to say, how is this thing I'm doing affecting me?
Yeah.
Now, it's a great privilege to be in a job and recognize I'm up against a system that isn't for me and to be able to leave. A
Yep.
lot of people don't have that privilege.
Yep.
And so then it's more a matter of what are those things that I do have control over.
Yeah.
I'm powerless over certain things in my job play,
Yep.
in my workplace. But what are those things I can do to take care of me?
Yeah.
And it's so important for our functioning and for our well-being to feel like I have some control. Powerlessness is right up there with loneliness in
Yep.
terms of how toxic it is.
And again, the piece, like even insofar as I recognize there are things that I'm powerless over, to have the perspective that that's not me. That's not me.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
this thing is bigger than me. And this happens. I mean, this is a thing I learned early in life, early-ish, like in my early 20s in life, is that with something like grief, which in some ways works a lot like the sort of the emotional power of social media, is it's just bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my reactions and responses to it, but until I recognize and give into like the actual reality, there are things happening that are much larger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just about me. If I just internalize it, I feel broken, which is where the shame
Mm-hmm.
spiral begins.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
Right.
I'm broken. I feel like I'm overwhelmed and I can't
Mm-hmm.
deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to deeper isolation. Again, like so thankful for your reorienting around connection and around, and that's why I started with like, what's it actually mean to love people? Because as goofball as it might seem, the simple part of being a human is like it really does come down, it doesn't, you can't put it in a Hallmark card, but it's almost that simple. Like there's some really basic needs that have to do with being connected to people and in places where we actually feel like we belong, where we feel cared for and valued.
Yeah.
It really is in some ways that simple. And I love that you continue to pick up these threads of very complex and hyper nuanced bits of edges of the conversation and draw it back to like, I think it might have to do with this. So thanks for doing your work. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you would like to follow up with Molly Lacroix, you can visit her at mollylacroix.com. Lacroix is Lacroix. And from there, you can jump to her book, which we referenced during the conversation. You can also dig through her blog, as well as a number of other resources she makes there available at her site. If, on top of that, you'd like to be one of the folks that makes this podcast happen, you can visit us at patreon.com/Justin McRoberts. We would love to have you on the team. Until next time.